the first vines were brought to Bordeaux, or Bordighera at the time, by the Romans, and the soils around Haut-Brion have been in a monoculture, or even in Saint-Emilion, for close to 2,000 years. So that has impacted and been part of the microclimate and what has formed the vineyards, but also the taste of the wines that we produce. Many of the other vineyards in the world, and some that you've alluded to, are relatively new, and they just haven't had the time and the experience over generations to be able to discover the ins and outs of one particular parcel of vines and what particular varietal works best with this or that particular parcel. We're lucky to have inherited an extraordinary culture and knowledge base, if you will, to fine-tune our winemaking, and that continues with every generation. We were excited when I first went into the vat room and discovered the first vats. I mean, that's when not only when you're tasting the grapes, but when you start tasting the first vats after the fermentation process, we were excited. We knew that we had something special.
For those people who haven't discovered Bordeaux yet, Wine Spectator doing their cover story this month saying Bordeaux Reborn, a new museum opening this month, and you've been intimately involved with that.
We really have seen a rejuvenation, a rebirth of the city. Not only is it, I believe, after Paris, the second most beautiful city in France, but we have this exciting modernity that comes through the universities. We've had a total clean-up of the city to be able to re-reveal the architecture of the 17th, 18th, and 19th century downtown Bordeaux, and now we have these new neighborhoods that are being graced with such structures like the Cité du Vin, which obviously is hoping to receive 450,000 people a year. We have, which is really seeing the rejuvenation of a neighborhood that had pretty much been abandoned beforehand.
What makes each one a little different than the other?
So what makes the difference ultimately is the microclimate. I mean, there are aspects that might make differences vis-à-vis, for example, the density of planting at Emilion that has traditionally been planted at 10,000 vines per hectare compared to Haut-Brion that's been at 8,000, but ultimately it's a difference of soils. It's basically that patchwork, that magical patchwork of the combination of the different soils that make a different style of wine. Even if we have the same grape varietals, the same winemaker, there's a different expression of style. It's very clear at Emilion and Haut-Brion. Emilion, for example, is a wine that tends to be denser, has more fruit, has more of a velvety style. Haut-Brion tends to be more elegant, a little bit more complex, a little bit longer, a little bit more intellectual, if you will. Emilion tends to be a little bit more easy to understand when it's young, a little bit more voluptuous, and there's something spiritual in the wine, I would say. And there's very different styles. Quintus, we've obviously, our predecessors have had a long time to get to know Quintus, but we've only come to discover Quintus over 5 vintages now. 2015 is our 5th, and so we're still learning to understand the vineyard. 2015 is certainly our greatest vintage that we've produced at Quintus. We were aided by the weather conditions, the weather conditions and Mother Nature was perfect, and that obviously makes our job that much easier.
You've recently opened a restaurant in Paris. Why get into the restaurant business?
It's a very good question. I ask myself that every day. But I'm, like you, probably passionate about food, and you can't be passionate about wine without being passionate about food also, ultimately. But we also have an extraordinary history at Haut-Brion in that in 1666, the Pontac family, then owners of Haut-Brion, opened up a restaurant in London in what was to become the City of London, and ultimately one of the biggest markets of exchange, but also financial markets in the world. In those days, they were introducing new tastes, not only through their restaurant, but they introduced a new wine called the New French Claret.
Exclusive like Haut-Brion, which some people say is the oldest luxury brand in the world, the first wine to carry the name of where it was made.
That's correct, because we have history where we've noted that Haut-Brion as a wine was mentioned, was written down as a wine. We have been able to trace back some written mentions of Haut-Brion dating back to 1521, not as a parcel, but to have one product coming from one place being produced under the same name for over 5 centuries I don't think there's many people that can say the same. So there might be families that are winemakers, there might be regions that are producing wine, but to have a very specific product being made in exactly the same soils under the same name, I think we're unique in that way.